Good afternoon. My name is Terrence Nicholson, Art Director at the Anacostia Arts Center and Encore Gallery. Today we're pleased to have an artist talk with James and Zsudayka Terrell, moderated by Carol Rose Dyson. Enjoy.
Good afternoon.
Hello. So good to see a person in person.
It's so good to see you both in person, see everyone in person. I'm just so honored to be able to talk to both of you. I'm a huge fan of your work, which you know. And,
Thank you.
Sometimes just have such explosive feelings when I see pieces like The Drummer, like several of the pieces that are on display here, because it's just genius.
Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to come and have this talk with us.
Of course. So let's just jump right in. I was looking at your work on the website, and again, the work is in this exhibition. And when I look at your work today, I often, as a viewer, I often see relationships. I see these warm relationships, stories and narratives about relationships to oneself, relationships to our sister friends, great relationships to our children. So I wanted to ask, when a viewer, any viewer, sees your work, what is it you want them to take away from seeing it?
You know, it's funny that you ask. That's actually changed for me this year and since right before the COVID. I think that in my work, I've always wanted to tell stories. I've always wanted to give an empowered view of the Black woman. That's always been in my mission statement. And in March, I think the first week in March, I had this experience where we were watching the movie The Last Black Man in San Francisco, which is like my favorite movie right now. And I was looking at every scene and how every scene, you could screenshot every single scene. It was so beautiful and it was so intentional. And it really shifted the direction of my work. Like I had all these visions at the time of pieces that I wanted to do because I really wanted to get deeper into the story, not just figuratively, but the whole scene and, you know, the whole experience. And so, you know, like in the new work, for example, there's a piece where a woman is cooking in her kitchen. And so, you know, instead of just doing a portrait of a woman, it's like, no, now this woman is in her first apartment and it's a little tiny apartment and she's got her little altar up on the shelves and, you know, she's got all her little adornments. And so now I'm really wanting to get into, you know, what is behind the portrait and what is behind the figure that's in the story. And you know, the deeper ways that people can connect to the stories, you know, like that particular one, when I put it up, even without explaining to people what it was, they got it. And this reminds me of my first apartment. This reminds me of my first place, and took them through a journey. And, you know, so I really, that's kind of the direction that I'm going in now.
So your use of materials also changed with the direction, is that correct?
Yes, I have always done mixed media work. I've always done, you know, I'm a lover of collages. I'm a big fan of Romare Bearden. My mom is a seamstress, and so, you know, she taught me how to do quilting and how to sew and things when I was really young. So I'm a big fan of a Faith Ringgold. I'm a big fan of Bisa Butler's and how everything is put together. They've always been separate from me. It's like I did a collage, I did a painting, I made this jewelry. And this year, some of it I think is because we reset our studio. And so all the supplies are out all at the same time. And it was kind of like a breakthrough for me to be working on a painting and then saying to myself, I'm not gonna paint the hair, I'm gonna do the hair in paper. And then I had a friend who lives in Ghana, and she was like, I have all this scrap fabric I need to get rid of. I'm gonna just mail you a box. And so all this fabric came, and I'm looking at all these designs like, I'm not gonna paint the walls. I'm gonna use fabric on the wallpaper. Or, and I have all these plants in the house, you know, and James is like, why don't you put your plants in your paintings? And being like, I'm gonna, you know, resin the pots, and so that it has these layers and these other elements to it. So that's something that, I think too, because we were home on quarantine, for me, because I was used to having to work in spurts and dealing with the kids and everything else. So for me, it gave me an opportunity where all of a sudden I was having 8-hour days in the studio again. And I was just like, there's so many different things I can do and I can spend more time. And so it really, it caused everything to really merge and come together now. So now, I'm in a weird space now where I don't even necessarily consider myself as much, like, I think our last show that we did here was all acrylic paintings from me. And I don't have any paintings that I've done in this year that are all acrylic anymore. So I'm like I feel like a different artist.
I was looking at the textures as I came in because those two help to deepen the story of the image that I saw as I was coming in. So we're going to include James on this question. And also, when I see your work, James, I see kind of some masculine ideals. I know you're a musician, so there's a lot of music that resonate, DC ministry. And so I also want to ask you, what do you want people to say, I get that, or walk away with when they see your work?
I would say that my work is strongly influenced by masculine energy.
Yes.
Being raised by my parents here in DC. My father actually started as an artist growing up. He went to school and studied art. Went to Central State and was an art major. But as he got out of school, he realized that the art world was very segregated and he really couldn't do what he wanted to do. And so he left art and went into education, became a teacher, then left teaching and went into ministry, became a pastor eventually. And so growing up in the household, there was a bunch of paint piled up in the basement. I always wondered whose paint is this, or where's this paint from? As I looked around the house, there was always a bunch of paintings on the walls, and I didn't notice that he had painted a bunch of those paintings. I didn't realize that until I got older, when we talked about it. And that really influenced my interest in art. So as I was growing up, I was always into sketching. Didn't really know where it came from, but it came from my father. And then I started to pursue it. And I applied to Howard University. First I went to a school called Pace University, where I was trying to study business. And it was not working out. I actually failed out of the business classes. And then I realized that I didn't really want to focus on business. I wanted to focus on art. So I started taking art classes at Pace. And I really got into it a whole lot. Then I transferred to V-State for a semester, where I just started studying art full-time at V-State, Virginia State. Then I left there and transferred to Howard and went to the Howard program in fine arts full-time. When I got there, I met a bunch of really inspiring artists. Frank Smith.
Yeah, okay, I was going to ask you if you could share.
Oh yeah, so I met Frank Smith,
right.
Jeff Donaldson, Al Smith, Skandar Bagazian, Adewale, and some of those guys were into a group called Afro-Cobra. I didn't know who they were, so they made us study Afro-Cobra over and over again, and study about color theory and the use of colors and how colors are applied and how they bring out certain messages in your artwork. And so, as I began to study the use of colors, they were introduced to these color theorists called Albers and Eichen, and it really got me interested into color saturation and how the placement of colors and how it makes your eyes move around the canvas. So it really started to intrigue me into how to use color to make movement onto a one plane, onto a canvas, because you're competing with television nowadays. So how can you keep the eye still moving on a flat surface? And so I was really intrigued by that, and I kept going at it, trying to figure out how can I keep people interested on a piece of art that's just on a wall.
Oh, don't stop. I'm looking at, again, there's a couple of pieces on the wall, and I did really see an Afro-Cobra influence. And because that I was going to ask you about as your development as an artist, and because your colors and your placement of colors, if you're just explaining it, some of it, how it developed, because it's profound, and I sometimes I look at you, I look at James Phillips, who's a
yes.
cover artist,
Mhm.
and I think about what do you all see at night? Do you all have dreams? That you all that you're able to place these colors and the tones and the hues are the same and are complementary. That's a gift.
So one thing I was wrestling with growing up, I was heavy into rap music growing up. That's like in the early 90s when gangster rap was becoming popular. So I was trying to be a DJ, had the turntables, had the mixer, had all these hip hop records. And then one day I came home and all my rap records were gone. And I was just like shocked. And at the time, my dad was working at Pace in New York. He would come back and forth from DC. He would work in New York during the week, come home on the weekends and preach because he couldn't get the job in DC. And I finally got hired at Howard and we started working there full time. But during that time period when my father was in New York, coming back and forth, my mom took my records because he was saying that the albums were too degrading towards women and to the Black culture at the time because of the curse words and what they were saying. And she was trying to get me out of that whole mindset. And so what happened was it made me go into her crates of records. And she had the whole John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Curtis Mayfield, Jimi Hendrix, all these different jazz and R&B artists. And it made me understand where the music was coming from, the different samples from the hip hop that I did not understand at the time period. And so I was trying to figure out how the jazz musicians, their tones, and I was trying to match my colors with the tones of the music. And so I began to talk to my teachers at Howard about how can we map out a situation where you can, like the scale system that you see in music, how can we map that out with color at the same time, with the values and the tones, and the different sounds from the high into the lows.
So there's a whole nother story in understanding your art.
But then I went to, after I left Howard, graduated, I went to New York. I taught for a year in DC. I didn't want to do it anymore. So I applied to every art school in New York I could find. And then I got into Parsons. And then when I got into Parsons, it was a whole different approach to art.
Oh, yeah.
And they were saying I was using too much color. They said I was doing too much on the canvas and I should, lighten up, but it wouldn't stop. But we had teachers at that Parsons who would come in, like Faith Ringgold was a teacher of mine also and taught me how to approach color. So that was very helpful.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. So, Jay, tell me about your development as an artist.
Well, I'm self-taught, and I think that that's something that's been really heavily influential in my journey. I've always loved, I've always been a Renaissance woman, I would say. I started out as a poet and was like kind of semi-famous traveling around when I was in my early 20s and my late teens. There was like a big explosion in the poetry community. And so, I was traveling around the country and meeting all these people and having all these experiences, seeing all these different things. And, I was performing these poems, but also in my journals, I have all these little sketches that are surrounded by words or that, like at that time, the average poem was 3 minutes. But, I was writing things that were like, because I had studied poetry and I had studied writing. I went to school for journalism. My mom has an English degree. She has a journalism degree as well. So I had really studied poetic form and really studied the actual writing of poetry versus, just like the average spoken word poem. And so I had those in my journals as well, but they were often accompanied by little sketches. And so as I was performing, one of the things that I found was that, I've got these different things that I want people to feel, that I want them to experience. And I've written this 3-minute poem. I jumped up on stage. I'm screaming this poem at them in my performance. And then afterwards, when people are coming up to me and, they're talking to me about the things that I wanted them to feel, that sometimes they weren't even paying attention to what I was saying in my poem. They're like, oh, I love watching your lips, or you have such big eyes, and like all these other things that didn't have anything to do with how I wanted them to feel. And it started to make me really distant from poetry performance and really get more into my drawings, because it's like, oh, I can put up an image and, I can communicate a feeling, better than anything else. And so for me, probably, I've always said I was going to be an artist, but I wasn't really very good when I started, or not very consistently good, because I didn't really know what I was doing. I went to Hobby Lobby and I bought an oil paint kit, no turpentine, no thinner, anything like that. I just bought some oil, bought a brush, bought some like pre-stretched canvases, and was like, I'm going to go home and be a painter. And so, I was painting and it was fun. And I was teaching, and I was running different art programs in Denver, and, learning a lot more about art and kind of dabbling here and there. And two things happened. One, somebody told me to join an art collective. And Denver had one Black art collective, the Sankofa Art Collective. And I was like, okay, I'll join it. You have to apply. You have to show, your work. Like, they were very serious about it. And one of the sisters, they were like, yeah, you're in. And I was shocked, because my work was not good at all. And she said so. One of the sisters was like, your work is really not that good, but something like, you're going to be good if you keep working, and we want to support that. And so they let me into this art collective, and I started, I created a Black Arts Festival, and all of those artists surrounded me and supported it. And so, now I'm sitting in booths with these master artists, and we're just like talking, and they're showing me little things that they do, and, walking by, giving me little pointers like, hey, you should try this or try that, or like, it's oil, you need to like thin this out. This needs something else with it. And so I started picking up a lot of information that way. So that happened. Then in 2010, I had probably the worst year of my life. And I had a day where I was like in complete breakdown. And I was like, I need to just have like a therapeutic painting moment. And so I painted this piece of, it's the two towers, but I'm the towers. And I'm the Statue of Liberty, and the planes are flying into me. And I'm on fire, and I'm falling apart. And I wrote on it, I can't remember what it was, but it was like a depression soon follows, and I had an art show, and I had I had a studio space in the art district in Denver. And so we had a show, and we had a First Friday opening night, and I had some space. So I tossed this piece up, just trying to fill some space. And people were like walking up to it and were just like, oh my God. And, again, it's not a bad piece, but it's not like technically fantastic. But just hearing people be like, I have felt this way before. And like, I was just kind of sitting in the back. I wasn't really talking to them, but hearing them just be like, this is violent and this is devastating. And they got it. They were where I was at that time. And I was just like, what a magic to be able to like draw something. I don't even have to talk to y'all. Y'all are not distracted by me or any other things that I bring to the table. Like, you're able to look at this picture and have a whole experience of your own. And like, I can make you feel a certain way by how this picture is put together. So I was hooked from that point on. And like, I pretty much stopped doing poetry at that point and really, really pursued learning how to paint and trying to figure out how to paint. And so I moved to DC a couple of years later. I had my daughter, and I didn't intend to be in DC. I actually intended to move to Atlanta, and then just ended up in DC because of the world. And I had always said I was going to live in DC, but I thought it was going to be like a couple of years after I actually ended up here. And I met him shortly after I got here. And I would be hanging out with him at his house. And he doesn't have any oil paint. He has acrylic paint everywhere. And, I need to work on pieces, and he's working on his pieces and stuff. And so I'm just like, okay, well, I guess I got to learn how to paint with acrylic, because I can't be dragging these wet oil paintings back and forth. And then I was live painting a lot, and like, live painting with oil is stupid. And but I didn't know better. So I'm out just doing my thing. But I started to use his acrylics. And, of course, for business reasons, I can paint live faster and those sort of things. But then I started to really learn how to use the acrylics and understanding the ways you can mix the colors and the different mediums and the different ways that you can apply and layer and ways to create depth. And I was pretty decent at photorealism for a little while, because that was always my goal, was you're a good painter if you can do a photorealistic painting. Once you learn how to do a photorealistic painting, then you can go anywhere you want to, because I can justify this might be wild, but I have the actual skill set. I can paint you how you look right now. I'm just choosing not to. And so I got comfortable with my portraiture and started to just go a different direction and explore with what are some other things I can do. And so, I had heard about Afrocobra, and I had really studied a lot about the ways that African Americans have been able to approach portraiture. And a lot of times that means we're not painting brown figures. That era definitely encouraged painting people in different colors and using bright colors for the skin tones and not so much the browns. So I experimented with that for a little bit, but that never really fit for me. I love the browns. I love the different skin tones. I love when I'm looking at all of us sitting next to each other and we're all these different shades of browns. And so for me, I was I want to use the browns. I want my people to be brown. I want it to be clear that these are Black people. It's Black art. It's for everybody, but it's Black art and it's Black people. And I want it to be 100. I know, but I don't want anybody to be oh, this orange person might be anybody. No, this is Keisha and she's Black. But over the years, just thinking about I was always really into Cubism and Picasso, and so thinking about okay, now I'm looking at the figure, and I had a little bit of time where I was how can if I painted a face, but I only used one part of the face, how do I let people know it's a face? If it's a whole painting and it only has one eyeball, it could be completely abstract. But what is that one eyeball? How do I use that? Or if I put a lip on it, or if I just put a nose on it, how do I do that in a way where no matter what I'm creating, people are able to look at it and be that's a face. Mm-hmm. So, I had a really loose period of time where I was just experimenting with colors and experimenting with features. And then I think that over the last probably 5 years, especially as we've had more kids, I didn't have time to experiment like that anymore. And I had to start thinking about okay, you've got 20 minutes. What can you do in 20 minutes? And you have to be able to get it done, and you have to be able to stop, go do something else, and then come back and pick right back up. And so it started to make my work more structural, where I was just okay, I've got the figure painted. Are you going to cube it? If you're going to cube it, you got 10 minutes, cube it. And I'm trying to get it all done as quick as possible. And then looking at it, and people are oh, it reminds them of stained glass. And for me, I'm well, I'm really into quilt work. So I was thinking of the pieces in terms of quilting and each thing stitched together. So I'm okay, I don't want them to think it's stained glass. I'm going to add the stitch line. So then I started with adding the stitch lines in between, and then really thinking about what if the whole piece conceptually was a quilt, but it was painted? And so, in 2018, when we did the Born at the Bottom of the Ship show, all of those pieces, that was my whole thought, was okay, these are painted quilts. And so that has now evolved into, this is a whole mixed media vibe. And it's paper, and it's fabric, and it's I dye the paper now. So I had a period of time where I was buying all these different designer paper and collaging with it. And then I was online, and I'm looking, and I'm Delita Martin is using the same paper that I have. I don't want that. I love her, but I don't want us to be getting the same paper. I need to figure out how to use this paper differently. Or looking at Patrick Huger is using the same paper that I am to do his collages. I want a distance. I want my stuff to stand out on its own. So then I was I got to learn how to dye paper. So, I learned how to marble paper. I learned how to print the paper, so now it's a whole different thing. I'm picking out an image. So before I was freehand kind of painting, and sometimes I would have source photos, sometimes I wouldn't. Now I'll build a source photo on Photoshop, and then I'll draw it in marker or in charcoal, And then I'm like, I gotta dye the paper for this part. Or I gotta, print the fabric for this part. I've gotta so it's much more of a plan now. I think one thing that's really interesting for the two of us is when he was talking about color theory, we really sit with the pieces and flip through color theory books and look at each color. And it's much more of a conscious choice now, where I think for both of us, it used to be more of a free flowing, oh, I love this red, here it is. And yeah, we know green complements red, so we'll make sure we put a green, but now really looking at it okay, now this is this specific tone of red, and here's the 6 tones of red that enhance it. Here's the complementary tones. Oh, okay.
Are those going to be in those little blips? They're going to be in the interview?
The cracks in the audio?
Right.
I'll do what I can.
Thank you for defining it as cracking.
It's all good. I like yours.
So yeah.
There's so much to what you just said, and I have a bunch of questions. But I want to go back to what you said, and then I met him. I've known you all a few years, and I do want to ask about, because you had a particular style before you met James, and James had a particular style before he met you. And I have seen over the last few years that these are beginning to change. Two things. How have you all influenced each other? And you said something about you all speak the same language. I'll make that the second question. In that, what are the words? In terms of you all coming together to speak the same language in the art. What are the connections? The colors. But so the first thing, I'll go back to the first thing. How have you all influenced each other?
Well, I was to go back to how we first met. And one day I was driving through DC, just driving around, when I had my BMW drop top. Before they had a minivan. I was driving around DC, driving up Georgia Avenue, and I was stopped at the light, looked to my left, and there's a mural on the wall of this boarded up house. It's a mural covering up the whole front and side of the building. And I'm like, who is this artist? Why is their work here? Why is my work not up here? So I just wondered about that for a while, wondering who this person was and how I didn't get this position. Then months passed, on and on and on. And some friends of mine from high school came in town to visit me at the time. Another friend said, well, I'm going to an art show. Well, come to the art show and hang out with us. So I thought about it for a while, and I said, well, let me go to the art show, see what's going on. Art show was on Georgia Avenue at a place called Everlasting Life. Go to the show and didn't know it was her show. And go there and I meet the artist, give her my card, and then we leave. And then come to find out that she was the artist who had the artwork on the wall of that building. And I was trying to figure out who was this artist. And then from there on, I think I contacted you or you contacted me. I'm not sure. But either way, we ended up going out and meeting up for to talk about art.
So let me tell them what you did. Let me tell you. So it turns out we live around the corner from each other. And so, it's wintertime. Me and my daughter walk to this restaurant right around the corner from us, and he meets us there. We had been like, yeah, I'm an artist too. But he didn't really elaborate. He had a postcard. So this is the only reason why I called him back, is a lot of people come up to you, especially when you're a woman in arts, and they're like, oh, I'm an artist too. Now I can hook you up with some opportunities. And they don't want to hook you up with any opportunities. They want to hook up with you. And so I only called him back because he had an actual card, and the postcard had actual art on it. And I was like, okay, this is cool. The art that's on it, this is not bad art. Because that's the other thing is like they'll show you art and you'll be like, nice to meet you. So, you know, I was like, okay, this art is nice. Like, I'll go see. So we get there. He sets up a computer, busts it open, and it's like, here, look at my art, and disappears. And so, you know, we're in the restaurant just like, and I'm flipping through the art, and I'm like, okay, this is really dope. And then he comes back, and he's like, yeah, you know, I have a show up. You know, you can see, you know, some more of my work, and I'll introduce you to the people who I have the show up with. He fails to mention that he has a solo show at the Banneker Douglas Museum that is 3 floors of just his work with a video, and that his band is going to be there, and that they're doing church service and all of this. So I'm just like, why would you not say that? Like, why we pull up? You know, he introduces me to the people that run the museum galleries, and then he kind of disappears again. And I'm walking through, and I'm like, this is not. Why would you not say that this is what this is? Like, I'm thinking we're just going to like a regular group show. Like, why would you not say that you have solo shows in museums? Like, who does that? And so from that point, we just started hanging out and painting. Like every day he would call and be like, you know, he was teaching art not too far from where we lived. And he'd call and be like, what's up? What you doing? And I'm like, oh, you know, I'm painting. I don't do anything else but paint. And so he'd be like, all right, I'll swing by and we'll paint. And, you know, I had a mentor I was working with around the corner who was really crazy and really brilliant. And so we would go hang out with him. His name was Steve. We would go hang out at Steve's house and we would paint with Steve. And so we just got to, I think that's really how we formed our bond was just sitting and painting with Steve. We had this like crazy summer with Steve. And because Steve would drink like a liter of whiskey and just be crazy. But he would make these amazing art pieces. Like Steve would take pictures of the clouds and print them out and cut them up and glue them all down and then smash paint on them and then let it dry and then trace figures out of it. Like, but he was just so crazy. Him and his wife would like damn near fist fight. Like there was times where we would be like, I think that's what really bonded us. We gather in our, because they got the fist fight, and we gather in our art. So, and you know, they're that type of couple that like to fight. Like, we gather in our stuff up as quick as we can, trying to get up out of there because they about to be crazy. And I think that those experiences really made us become really good friends. And Steve would give these critiques, like harsh. Steve did not pull no punches. And so but good critique.
You wanted to see my artwork before I came over there? That was funny.
Yeah, he said he couldn't come over until he saw his artwork. And then he said, because, you know, at the time we had been hanging out for just a little bit and it was like, we weren't really dating at the time. We were just friends. But Steve was like, you know, you seem you kind of talking about him a little bit more. Like, who is this person? And, you know, I had mentioned he was an artist. And he came by after church one time. He had on an all-white suit. And Steve was like, hell nah. Don't come back over here until I see your art. And I don't. Steve was crazy. But that had really bonded us. And so, like, the basis of our relationship is sitting and talking about paint and talking about art.
Oh, man.
I think
that's funny.
these are really good insights in terms of giving us an understanding of how you all met, your desire, your exploration, your personal drive in terms of becoming a fine artist, and also yours, James, I mean, your father, and then going to school. So we see the intensity, we see the nature and nurture of and maybe I shouldn't say it like that, but you grew up in it. You did as well to some degree, but you pursued it, you know, your own self-development. So and the strength of your self-development, and then you all coming together again over art, and the conversations and the friendship and the bond, which you see, and especially if you go to the first image on your webpage with you all taking a picture as a couple. And that was the first thing that I also found really beautiful, because I feel that the image of a couple, the image of friends, the image of two Black people that you can tell there's respect. It is a very positive, empowering, and that's again images that you both create. So back to that, you say you speak the same language. What are the words that you all speak that are the same language?
Well, I guess when we met, I would say My art gave her more structure, and then her art made me loosen up because I was so rigid.
Oh.
I was really into stained glass windows growing up in the church. I was really into the structure of art. This color goes here, this color goes there. And then when she came along, I was starting to be more fluid with my colors. It wasn't so rigid.
And even his structure too, because like one time we went to this boutique in Georgetown to get a dress for an event. And what did the lady ask you to show her a piece? She asked him to like show her a piece or something. And so he shows her this portrait that he painted. That's all these, to me, it's just all these crazy lines. And, you know, I could tell that it was like structured in some way. But to me, I'm like, oh, this is a face that's a bunch of crazy lines. She proceeds to inform us that she's a brain surgeon, and so she can see how he has colorized the muscles and the arteries to mimic the brain or something like that. Like that's how structured his pieces were. Was that like this is a portrait of the actual lymphatic system in bright colors, so to the line that a medical professional was able to be like, this is the lymphatic system, or, you know, whatever it was. Like, that's how structured he was.
Yeah.
I can see, because that was a question that I had in my mind was about the stained glass images do look fractured. I think, and I thought that perhaps a fractured has to do with the whole modern or contemporary idea of society is fractured and, you know, that kind of thing. But I can see stained glass. I can see that. And two, I was looking at those ribbons that were definitions of different parts of the body. And, I was wondering how do you see those? I guess that's the gift of an artist. Do they come to you in the middle of the night? When you get up in the morning, you draw them, and then I guess that's always a question to an artist. How do you make that way?
Well, at the time when I was doing the whole line structure, my work has changed a lot since then. But at the time, I was heavily into jazz, into the movement, and I was trying to capture each stroke was each note. I was trying to layer upon that to build up a whole song within that portrait. So at the time, that's how it came about, that particular style I was working with.
I get you. All right.
And, my approach, especially when we met, is completely opposite. I'm a wild person, so it's just a lot of wild, like, we're going to put some wild paint on here and figure it out. And
I love it. So let's talk about the exhibition. So tell me a little bit how it came about. Tell us
where to start? I think that...
Well, you got to start to the progression of where the first show, the second show, then this show, the names and how they lined up.
Here, why don't you talk about that?
So we're working on the series, and we first started, our first show together was called Born at the Bottom of the Ship, dealing with Africans being brought over to America in a slave ship. And so we were trying to capture that emotion. Then the next show we did was called Emergency, where we were coming from the sea onto the land. And now we're in the color section where now you're in the land, but you're being segregated. So we're trying to do a whole series on the movement of Black people from Africa to America.
I think that this work in this exhibit is really special because, we had booked this about this time last year. And, so both of us were working on solo projects. And we're really pushing for solo projects, and they asked us to show together. And so we were like, okay, we're trying to figure out what that looks like because both of us, especially this last 6 to 7 months, are going through artist growth spurts, and it's hard to build a combined show when you're like, well, I'm trying to grow and you're trying to grow. So, I can't tell you what I'm going to want to say next week. I can't tell you what. And so we started out and we had we had a specific thing we wanted to say. And then, what would you say? At the pandemic or right before? I would say maybe right before the pandemic, both of us had a complete shift in approach in subject, in what we wanted our art to even say. I think both of our artist statements, the whole, I think we both were like, oh, new person, new art, like new vibe. And that was really a hard hurdle because, I know that for me, I was really, like I was saying earlier, wanting to get into telling stories of scenes and the importance of the whole scene and not just the portrait. So going from doing these are just people's faces and these are all, settled portraits into these whole environments that have to move, that have to be, the whole thing has to be alive. The whole thing has to be a vibe. And then thinking about okay, well, within the color section, what does that look like? What is that? And, so for me, I was thinking a lot about, they always call us the Cosbys. When people come to our house, they're like, you guys are like the Cosbys, but you're both artists. And so thinking for me about that's such an important vibe that we don't really see a lot in art, like the relationships and how that love and how those relationships impact all aspects of the environment. So it's not just two faces together that are in love, which is sweet, but there's that piece that's chilling with Bay, and it's two people and they're on the couch and they're just laid up, they're hanging out, they're drinking their little wine, but the love is apparent in the entire environment of the room, not just the two of them. And so, for me, really thinking about living in a Black neighborhood, being in a Black relationship, having a Black home, having these Black babies, and just how revolutionary that is just in and of its own existence, and then wanting to, put that onto canvas.
I would also say that in the first two shows that we did together, we were working together at that time period. We were on the same floor. Actually, we had moved our art supplies to the bedroom, and the bedroom became the studio. And
that sounds freaky. You should clarify that. That sounds a little freaky.
So people were saying that our work was very similar at the time. They're like, oh yeah, you guys had the same line, using the same colors. But even though they weren't exactly the same, because when you give birth to a child, we all humans, we have kids, but they all don't look the same. Because when you look at it, you can tell the difference if you actually sit there and look at it. But people were just trying to lump us up into one category and saying, oh yeah, you guys' work looks the same, you're a couple. But then when the pandemic hit, and I had to leave school, and I'm home every day, she moved her supplies to the basement. So I was watching the kids more. She was getting more time to work. And it gave me more respect onto the fact of how she homeschools the kids. And when I'm at work, I come home, I see the kids for about 3 hours, and I'm in the bed, and they're in the bed. And that's about it. But I'm now with them 24/7. So we had to work around. So how do I get ready for this art show? And I'm watching the kids upstairs. I turn my back, the kids have markers, they're drawing on my paintings. I gotta go back and try to fix a painting before the show comes up. So it gave me a whole new outlook on an approach to art. It was interesting, very interesting. But I learned a lot about patience, about time, learned about how the kids do have an interest in art, but how to go back and really understand what you're painting and get back in that mood to go back and fix something also tells a lot about your approach to art, because you can't always get back in the mood of that train of thought that you had and go back and try to get back into your artwork once it's been finished and the kids draw all over it.
Because of the kids, it forces you, and that's one thing that I always laughed about with him is that, for him, his painting, he would come home and he could just sit down and he would paint. And, I'm used to being with the kids all day. It forces you to really commit to what you're working on before you even start. It forces you to, you have to sit down and say, I want to do a painting about social unrest. And it has to look like this. And you have to see it before you even start, versus the freedom of being able to be because before, especially with him, he's a good drawer. So he would just do, and, there it is. And he paint it. And it forces you to have to be okay, it's going to be a flag, or it's going to be his quarantine piece. It's going to be about this. And this is why it's going to look like this. You really have to be more planned. And I think that that's strengthen both of us.
So what do your children get out of both of you all being artists? I'm hearing some of the things that you've learned as being parents, but what do your children get out, do you think?
From me, probably a lot of craziness and a lot of, the things that I'm really good at all revolve around the art. And so, like I keep the kids at home mostly because I just don't have the type of personality where I feel like I could take somebody someplace every day at the same time. Like I'm not dropping you off at school from 8 to 3 every day, and I'm not going to come pick you up. Like have other things going on. And so I think that there's that aspect of like they're with us all the time. They're sitting with us. They're sitting in the room while we're painting. They're coming down in the studio. I drag them to gallery openings, artist talks, museums. So they're probably relatively well-versed in a lot of art history, I think probably more than the average child would be. They have access to the supplies. So, we're not shy at all about kind of just succumbing to the mess. And so they have a wall in the house that they paint, that they're allowed to paint. It looks crazy. It's dinosaurs and stars and people. It's all kind of stuff. But they know they can sit at that wall. They can paint. They can use the markers. We'll have some canvas. Do something. Like y'all are all over the place. Do something. So they're getting a lot of opportunity for exploration that I think a lot of the other kids don't get. We unschool with the oldest. The youngest two are in more of a Montessori style curriculum, but we unschool with the oldest. And so for her, she's exploring herself and exploring her identity. And so, when she comes to us and says, I want to be a YouTube star, I'm like, cool. We have a whole wall over here of cameras. Learn how to use them. Learn how to, we print our own, like our T-shirts, our cups, those items we print now from home. And so, I told her, you got to have some merch. Get in here and learn how to print stuff. Come in, assist me. I took her to the post office and showed her how we package everything, so she's catching all these little like business things. And I don't want to overtalk, but I also feel like as a woman and as a mother who is technically a stay-at-home mom, because I'm home with them full time, but being able to show my daughters like, no, I make money staying at home and I take care of you guys. And I make money on my terms. Like I'm happy when I wake up and I'm happy, when I'm looking at the things that I'm able to achieve and take a certain level of care of my children. But, if he was a toxic person, I could leave him and continue to keep you guys and continue. We gonna be out here selling these earrings and these T-shirts like we were doing when I brought my oldest to DC. And so as a woman, I think giving them the opportunity to see that, like, no, build your business or build your interest now. And then you can do whatever you want as you get bigger, as long as you're focused on, you got to pay your rent. Once your rent is paid, you got to eat. So as long as you can take care of those basic things, do what you want to do and study it and learn it.
This has been very interesting. I have learned so much about both of them, and I thought I knew a little bit, but now I know a whole lot more. One of Andy Shalal's questions when he closes things out is kind of an interesting question. He asks his people that he's interviewing if they could have dinner with anyone. I'm going to say if you had a studio visit, if you could invite someone to your studio, or a dinner, or a cup of coffee, or you could spend time with any 1, 2, or 3 artists. James, who would you choose?
Well, musically, of course, I would say I would like to talk to Hendrix about his use of color in music. Because they said he was also an artist as well, and he could see colors in his chords structure that he uses. I would like to sit down and talk to him about what he saw when he played certain songs. I would also like to talk to Basquiat about the art scene at the time and how it truly affected his mental stability. And what would he change if he was able to do it all over again? Just to see his approach to art, how fast he created it, but also at the same time, the segregation at the time period and how he was pushed aside by some of, later on as he got older and how that affected him. So those would be the main two people I would like to talk to about.
Okay, how about you?
I would love to sit down and have a conversation with Frida Kahlo about a couple things. The power of ugly paintings, of painting the ugliness and not always choosing to paint the beautiful, and like what it is to be courageous enough to paint the ugliness sometimes. I wish that she could like apparate and I could be like, how do you feel about the commercialization of your image now? Because I remember when I first started painting, and like I have a Frida Kahlo tattoo. I love Frida Kahlo for her work. And nobody knew who Frida was. And now like she's very popularized. And so when I'm talking to people who are not like fine artists, the things that they say about her make me want to like flip tables. Cause I'm just like, you don't even understand the amazingness of this painting. Like y'all are so into the personality that you don't understand the talent. And, you know, so I would love to have that conversation. I would also like to sit down with Romare Bearden. I would love to, he has a series of pieces that are city streets. I would love to like talk about the composition of those and like what his thought process was, and you know how he put them together and how he saw them. I have a curriculum I made based on those pieces, and you know, so I would love to sit with him.
I'll share mine.
Yes, please.
The first one is Aaron Douglas. Aaron Douglas is from Topeka, Kansas, which is about 60 to 80 miles outside of Kansas City, Missouri, where I was born, and home of Charlie Parker. And I have always loved his stories. I've loved how he elevated the story of African Americans in this country and began that mixture of Africanisms in African American art. I also love Edward Hopper. Edward Hopper brought me into art. I was a legal secretary for some African American lawyers in Kansas City. I'm not going to tell you the story real long, but I was walking by this pharmacy, saw a poster, had to have it, eventually got it, and from there, it took me into art. So Edward Hopper, then two other people, Bisa Butler,
Yes.
and Zenobia Bailey. I love their work. It's just they're incredible.
Yes.
And
I low-key stalk Bisa Butler.
I hear you. So
One more that influenced me a lot was Ernie Barnes.
oh yeah.
Growing up watching Good Times, watching JJ paint his portraits really got me into art. After seeing my father's paints around the house, and then looking at this young man paint these images on TV every day that I watched the show, really got me into that style of trying to figure out who is this artist and going back and studying Ernie Barnes' work.
Well, I guess I wasn't in it, but I guess I didn't ask you all what's next. That's always a question to ask.
That's a good question.
What's next?
Global. The world.
You know what's wild is that this is the first time in my art career that I do not have an answer to that question. And on a number of levels. One, because the world is like in shambles right now. Like 2020 has just been so ghetto.
No, but actually, real quick. 2020 has been very good to us artistically.
It has.
Now, I've been surprised that even after our schools shut down, we've been getting work left and right, doing murals at Busboys, doing murals for downtown, other buildings, doing murals at Banneker and Douglas, getting paid for them, and then still being able to sell our merchandise, and people are still buying artwork.
Yeah, it has been, when everything first started in March, I was like, oh my God. Like, what an awful time to be an artist. Trying to tell somebody like, hey, this painting's $10,000, and people are like, ma'am. And it turned out to be exactly the opposite. I mean, like stuff, there was like a 2-week slowdown, and then it was just like,
Every day was something.
art is flying out the studio. Our merchandise line just blew up, like everything. It's been abundant, but it's been unpredictable. Like I just couldn't, you know, and then after the like riots started, there was like a big push for Black artists who haven't gotten the acknowledgement that they deserve. And I ended up on all these lists I had no idea that these people were like even in my radar. I'm just like, Claire Oliver Gallery is commenting on my stuff. Like, what? Like, and I'm on these lists, and I'm on lists with people like Bisa Butlers, and I'm just like, oh my God. And so that was really good for us. But then at the same time, I don't know what the gallery world is going to look like. We're here doing an artist talk on camera because, we can't have people come to attend the events in the same style, and it's forced us to really have to think completely outside the box about what it looks like to sell art and what it looks like to create art and market art. And so, which is a big opportunity for people like us because we already had so much of our business established. Like, now it gives us a chance to kind of circumvent a lot of the traditional barriers for artists and really be able to just like deal our work ourselves. And so that's been absolutely amazing. But then I don't know, like, are the galleries going to make it through the next year? What if everything closes again in the fall, what does that look like for, the gallery season? I know we were talking earlier about how like the applications and proposals and stuff that usually would be out right now are not. And so, there's that element. And then as artists, I think that for me personally, especially, I'm in such new territory in my creation process. I'm in love with the stuff I'm doing right now. And it's the first time I've ever just 100% been like, oh, no, this is that shit. Like, yes. And I don't even know, like, how it's about to evolve or what it's going to look like next. And, so I keep buying more equipment, which just so I don't know. I'm really curious to see, like, where's the work going to go after this?
I think you summed it up. We're trying to go global with it. Trying to take it to Japan. They're really into art, and we want to get our artwork over there. We want to get our artwork over in Europe and
Africa.
There's a big art scene in Africa right now. I think our artwork will be very well received in all those different areas. That's about it.
And so I'll bring this to a close, but I want to wish you all, or wish us all success. And I think about the success, the attitude that you bring, the constant uplifting, the conversation, the narratives that you bring to the work. I feel that the stories are important, and that hopefully we can all, as a community, be successful far beyond our wildest dreams.
Yes.
Also, in closing, like I say, going back to your first question about masculinity, I think my work really is based on that because of the fact that I was raised around strong black men.
But it's not macho masculinity.
Right.
That's the thing I know. It's not macho.
It's not macho. It's the fact that I was raised by my black father, black mother, but they were also always been around black men, like my grandfathers on both sides, who were strong black men and who taught me how to be self-sufficient, how to not be overbearing, how to support my wife, how to be respectful, how to be trustworthy, how to take care of a family. And so I was trying to also push that narrative in my work as well, that this whole stereotype and myth about black men not being fathers and black men just being drug dealers and drunks is not something that I grew around. I want to make sure that's known.
Right. That's again, that's very important because I know so much of the stereotypes that have been promoted on film and visual culture, it has to shift to be balanced. To show, one of the professors when I went to Howard said, how many people that you all know that are really drug dealers or been in jail? And not that, yes, Howard may have, in terms of being bourgeois, and a lot of the kids, young people were not connected to all that. But still, it was a smaller amount. But the visuals are always on that rather than the 2/3 of the population that are trying to do the right thing. So again, thank you.
Thank
you. All
you.
are fabulous. I love you all. You all teach me so much, and I'm grateful for that. I'm still learning. I'm what an old dog.
I hope to be learning consistently too. It's an honorable thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed your answers. I enjoyed them so much. Thank you.